Friends, some of our weekly correspondence. This comes from Wilmington, Delaware. It seems that a Father Henry Miller there on Sunday morning was instructing a group of school children on sacrifice. He talked for about half an hour, and then he said, "What is a sacrifice?" And one boy answered, "A sacrifice is when my mother makes me watch Bishop Sheen and I want to watch the Lone Ranger." So he sent the sacrifice of $1. And this comes from Carroll Place, New York, from a Mrs. Jonan, who said that she took her little 3-year-old daughter Mary to church for the first time. She wandered off investigating statues, and finally she came to a place where there were a number of candles before an altar, and she started blowing them out. And then she started to sing, "Happy birthday to you." And this comes from Atlanta, Georgia. And what is important about the letter is, of course, a reference to a birthday. It comes from Charles Jackson. But I must read you all of the letters so you'll get the full flavor of it. "I took a little TV survey of my own tonight, and I felt that I should let you know how it turned out. I called 10 persons here in Atlanta. Just by opening the telephone book and going down the list. Out of 10 I called, 7 were watching you, 3 were watching Romeo and Juliet. No one was watching I Love Lucy. On my 10th call, I asked a man who was watching Romeo and Juliet why he was not watching Bishop Sheen. His answer was, 'Well, it's getting near Lent, and I thought I'd give up something so it wouldn't become a habit.'" And Charles then says, "You were very popular down here in the Deep South. Well, now I better go. Homework calling. And as you say, God love you. Charles." Postscript. "Here is 25 cents for the poor you ate in Africa and Asia. I was going to buy a birthday card for my girlfriend. I hope you understand that this may be the ruination of my romance." So will you do me a favor on television? Say, "Happy birthday" to her, please. Her name is Cindy. Tell her it's from you know who. Happy birthday, Cindy. Then this other story. It seems that the Italian government wished the United States government to give them a radar outfit by which they could send down messages to the sea, get the proper reactions back, and locate a school of fish. It would be a great aid to the fishermen. Mrs. Luce, when she was our ambassador to Italy, was asked to get this radar outfit. And she told them this story. It seems that the French government received one of these radar outfits to locate fish. And when the French government sent down a message to the sea, a message came back from the school of fish. They were under the leadership of a giant whale and a tiny little herring. It seems that these two were inseparable, like the Damon and Pythias of the sea. Wherever the whale went, there went the herring. Messages always came back from both until this particular day when the French government sent down a message, only the herring answered. The French government was disturbed. It was getting to be a cabinet crisis. And they said to the herring, "What happened to the whale? Was the whale harpooned when they were taking a movie of Moby Dick? Did it bump its nose against an iceberg? Was it hit by a submarine? Where is the whale?" And the little herring answered, "Am I my blubber's kipper?" Now, after that, you ought to hear a few ideas on how to psychoanalyze yourself. Anybody who goes to a psychoanalyst ought to have his head examined. So let's examine ours. And we will try to determine what makes a person normal, and also what are the indications that one is becoming not so abnormal as to need a psychiatrist, because where there are serious cases of mental illness, these must be cared for by a psychiatrist, and psychiatry belongs in the domain of medicine, not in the domain of psychology. We're not concerned with those. Now, what is the difference between people who are normal and those who have a tendency to be abnormal? Well, the first difference is this. The normal person has a goal or a purpose in life. Those who are beginning to be abnormal and are losing peace of soul have no goal or purpose in life. First of all, the normal have a goal, just as you would not have a gadget in your house 10 minutes without asking, "What's it for?" So you ask the same thing about life. House is made to live in, a church is a place of worship. So man must have a purpose. And the normal people decide on that before they decide on anything else. And the ultimate normal purpose of man is to be happy. Now, happy in that which constitutes his personality. What man wants as his final goal is life, not life for 5 more minutes, and just enduring life. Secondly, he wants truth, not the truth of geography to the exclusion of science, but all truth. And thirdly, he wants love, not a love that has hate and satiety in it, but an enduring ecstatic love. This is the normal goal of human beings. And perfect life and perfect truth and perfect love is the definition of God. In other words, in seeking happiness is seeking God. Now, there's a principle in philosophy that the first in intention is the last in execution. Suppose you intend to go to Washington from New York. That's first in your intent. But it's the last place you get to, because you have to go through Newark and Philadelphia and Camden and Baltimore before you get to Washington. So too a person has to decide, first of all, what is the ultimate goal of life. In fact, so important is this for people that whenever you sit down in a dentist's chair, before the dentist starts boring you, he has a right to ask you your philosophy of life. Because if your philosophy of life is wrong, he can't be sure that you'll pay your bill. Apropos of a dentist, I heard Red Skelton say not very long ago, he told the story of a Texan who went to a dentist. And the dentist examined his teeth and said, "Your teeth are absolutely perfect." The Texan said, "Drill anyway. You may hit something." Now, the abnormal person is one who is without a purpose in life. The abnormal person has just a succession of petty little goals. He's very much like, for example, a farmer who might plant wheat one month and then tear up the wheat and plant corn, then tear up the corn and plant alfalfa. Or he's like a radio station that's tuned into 2 or 3 stations at the same time and getting only static. Minds that are tending to be abnormal are not fixed on any ultimate destiny. They read a book and they're a materialist one week and they're an idealist the next and the communist the next. They lay tracks down on Monday, tear them up, and lay them in another direction Wednesday or Thursday. Very often they're like those of whom Confucius spoke. Confucius said that sometimes young men have no other goal than the flesh or sex. In middle age, it's power, and in old age, it's avarice. And Confucius, a very wise man, said that very often avarice and greed in old age is nothing but a sublimation of the lust of youth. But in any case, these people establish false infinites, misplaced infinites. They will, for example, try to make a god of the flesh. And by the intensity of an experience, try to make up for some ultimate goal or destiny. That produces an unhappiness of mind. Then we come to another distinction and difference. The normal person is governed by reason and will. The abnormal person is governed by instincts, impulses, and also he believes that the subconsciousness is the determinant of his life. Now let us take a reasonable human being. A reasonable human being is very much like a ship. Ship. You laugh at me before I get started. I know it's that bad, but I can't help it. Now, this is a pilot house, and this is the pilot, this is the engine room, these are waters, and so he has... That star looks as if it were out all night. If Dick Brown, the cartoonist, could only see my stars. Now, a pilot has a destiny. He knows where he's going, to a port. He directs himself by stars. He communicates his ideas, and his orders, rather, down to the engine room. There is a disturbance from the outside by the waves, and sometimes the water will come in here, and then it'll be sent out again. But what is important is the fact that the pilot determines the direction of the ship. In other words, he's got a goal or a purpose. Now, man is like that, a normal man. First of all, he has a reason. He's interested in truth. He has a will. And when he sees a certain destiny or goal or something that ought to be done, then he wills to do it. So that at the top of a reasonable man is his intellect and his will. Now, these affect his emotions. For example, one receives sad news. One cries. It is not the crying that produces the idea of sad news. It is rather the idea that affected the emotions. The reason and will cannot always control the emotions directly, but can control the emotions indirectly by diverting thoughts in another direction. It is true that outside influences, the subconscious mind, the waters that get into the boiler, you're affected to a little degree. It is true that social, economic, parental background and influences do in some way affect man, but not seriously. And the combination of these constitute conscience. He has a fine sense of right and wrong. Well, that's the normal being. Now, the abnormal man is quite different from that. And I'm going to ask my little angel, since you laughed at my drawing, I'm going to ask my angel to draw the abnormal person. Oh, there he is already. This is my little angel. And here's the ship upside down. Now, this is a picture of the abnormal mind. Here is the subconsciousness. Here. Here is reason and will, completely submerged. Here are the emotions. What is important for an abnormal person is the subconsciousness. We are determined to be what we are because of something that is buried down in the depths of the mind. This may be part of the heritage of the collective unconsciousness of the human race. So they say. Well, what role does reason play? Reason is only to justify. Find excuses very often for the way that one acts. What is the will? Is that important? No. The will is just an arena where the conflict takes place. So it is the subconsciousness in an abnormal person that completely determines his whole life. Reason and will, therefore, are unimportant. Hence, he's not concerned about objective things. For example, a star, a port. Those do not interest him. He's interested only in finding out what is here in the depths. And that's why he's so keen on analyzing, not thinking out reasons. Hence he will, if he hears a fine piece of music, he's not so much interested in the music, but the way he feels when he hears the music. He watches a drama. He's not particularly interested in the unfolding of the plot. He's interested rather in the way that he feels when he sees the plot unfold. So, you would explain, for example, the fact that you cry when you eat an onion, get near an onion, is because you once were eating an onion and received news that you were disinherited, and you've cried ever since whenever you had an onion. The objective world and reasons are not the determinant, according to the abnormal. Hence, they're not concerned when they find a man who believes in God about his reasons. They do not ask him for evidence. They try to find some queer reason why he ever says he believes in God. Someone has said that a psychoanalyst is one who, when a very pretty woman enters a room, looks at everybody else. You heard the story, didn't you, of the two psychoanalysts who passed one another in the street? One said to the other, "Good morning," and the other said, "I wonder what he meant by that." And so, they live in a world not of reasons, but they live in a world of dreams. And all dreams have a tremendous meaning. And they are, for the most part, unfulfilled sex desires. Ah, if you only knew the depth of the dream world. Here's a story that I think explodes all this exaggerated belief in the subconsciousness of the determinate of rational beings. This individual came to a psychoanalyst and stretched out on a couch. He took his medicine laying down. He said, "What did you dream about?" He said, "I dreamt that I was out rowing. And there came over me a great desire for chocolate, and before I knew it, there were on my lap 2 Hershey bars." Psychoanalyst said, "Identical Hershey bars?" "Yes." "Do you know any people who are identical?" "Yes." He said, "There are some twins that pass my house every day. Identical twins, aged about 22, 23. How are they dressed?" "Brown." "Wear any jewelry?" "Yes. Little silver on the brow." "Well, can't you see that that's just a repressed desire, libido, for the twins? Come back and see me in 2 weeks." So he came back again, stretched out on the couch. The psychoanalyst said, "What did you dream about?" He said, "I dreamt about the twins. And if you tell me that has anything to do with 2 Hershey bars, I walk out." And the third difference is that the normal person believes in repressing the excesses of the lower instincts in order to express his reason and his will and his potential for divine grace. So there is a repression, to be true. There is also a repression for the abnormal. But the repression here is not of the lower instincts. It's rather the repression of the reason and the will in order to give an outlet for the lower instincts. There's no such thing as there being only repression in life. There's never a repression without an expression, never an expression without a repression. For example, an alcoholic man represses his love of alcohol. He's expressing, for the moment, a consideration for his wife. If he represses a consideration and love for his wife, he's expressing his alcoholism. You never have one without the other. Here's the repression of what is base and low. And not because any passions or instincts are wrong. None of them are wrong of and by themselves. It's only the excesses of them that are wrong. And one does it why? One does it on account of love. There's something one loves more. One loves the nobler, so one sacrifices that which is lower. And here, on the contrary, there is a repression of reason, moral law very often, in order to express the lower instincts. And the argument that such an abnormal person will give is, well, it's natural, isn't it? Shouldn't one follow one's nature? Certainly one should. But what is our nature? Our nature is not that of a goat or a pig. Our nature is rational. We're human beings, governed not by the subconscious mind, governed by a reason and governed by a will. It is false to say that we can always cure a psychological complex by a physiological outlet. One might just as well say the way to overcome a complex about committing suicide is to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. It's wrong also for people to think that we are to get rid of conflicts of life. There are certain conflicts that are inevitable in human nature, simply because we're composed of body and soul, and matter and spirit. And therefore, there's always a struggle. There's a cross that's at the very center of human life. No man is ever really happy on the inside until he's at war with himself. At war with that which is base, and which would destroy his Godward tendencies. As our Lord said, I came not to bring peace, but the sword. Not the sword that points and thrusts outward to destroy the neighbor, but the sword that thrusts inward in order to destroy one's egotism and one's lust and one's avarice and all the things that destroy also a people.
Little girl, we shall give her the name of McGarrity. And the little Jewish girl was a very good little girl, and she went to the synagogue every week. And the little Catholic girl went to the Catholic church every week. And on this particular Tuesday night, just about time for our program to come on, the little Jewish girl announced it, saying, "Come on, McGarrity's rabbi is on the air." Our subject for this evening is education. As you know, considerable fun has been poked at it. Will Rogers once described college bread as a 4 years loaf. There was a humorist in the last century who said that being a widow for 2 years is far better than a college education. And Robert Hutchins, formerly of the University of Chicago, said that the reason we give sheepskins to college graduates is in order to cover up their intellectual nakedness. These are, of course, very extreme views on education. But every one of us, of course, regrets that we had not studied more when we were in school. I got into considerable difficulty a year or two ago on television just by saying, I thought in mere fun, that I spent 4 years in the 3rd grade. And from that time on, many fathers and mothers have written in protest saying that they can't induce their children to study. They said, I was in the 4th grade for 3 years, and why shouldn't they be in the flunk year after year? But as I said, we do regret that we had not studied harder, particularly when we go to France. And here we study book French, and we go over there, and somehow or other they never speak book French in Paris. You get mad because the horses and dogs understand French, and you don't. So the American always shouts. He feels the reason the French do not understand him is because he doesn't speak loud enough. And about the only one who can understand American French in Paris is some other American. But our concern with education is not so much the vocational or professional side of it, but just a general philosophy of education with particular reference to colleges and universities. Now, the general aim of education is to train the whole man, the intellect and will, not just the mind alone. We went into a store to buy a suit of clothes, we would not take a suit that had only one sleeve. And you bought a pair of shoes, you'd want toes in it unless you wanted to be in style. And so with education. But tonight we're only going to talk about the intellect. Perhaps some other time we may talk about the will. Now, the intellect, if it is to be properly trained, should be developed along these 3 lines. First of all, an educated man will seek truth. Secondly, he will have a correlation of studies. That is to say, one subject in his college will be related to another subject. And thirdly, there will be depth, particularly the deepening of mystery. First of all, truth. The purpose of education is not just to train us for democracy, not to train us to make a living. The purpose of education is to acquaint us with truth. Truth about everything. Truth in a certain sense is narrowing. I know. Before you go to school, you're free to believe that Shakespeare was born in 208. And then you have to believe that he was born in 1564 and died in 1616. I hope that's right. I haven't looked that up. That just came right out of my unconsciousness. And we have to know the truth of science, the truth of literature, and above all, the truth of man. We're not able to serve democracy unless we are true human beings. We cannot make a living, for example, as an engineer, unless we know the truths of engineering. Beyond all these particular truths, the one basic truth that we have to learn is, of course, the truth of our own existence. We would not have a gadget in our house 5 minutes without knowing the meaning of that gadget. And yet some people will live 10, 20, 50, 60 years without knowing why they are here or where they are going. And when life is meaningless, it's very dull. And it is this absence of a goal or purpose that makes so many people full of worries, and anxieties, fears, psychoses, neuroses. After all, what's the use of living unless we know the purpose of living? Therefore, the first thing that education should give us is, what is the truth about a man? Why was he made? We will not develop that in detail. His ultimate purpose, when all other purposes are satisfied, is to attain perfect life and truth and love, which is the definition of God. Now, why is truth important? There is a principle in psychology that is called ideo-motor. That means that every idea has a kind of emotive power. It tends to work itself out into act. Suppose you're at a football game. You're in the stands where you can see the plays readily. And from this superior position of yours, you see a fullback swinging around right end. But you see an opening around tackle. And so you move this way. You had the idea in your mind, and the idea worked itself out into act. As a matter of fact, every idea that we do have tends to some kind of expression. That is why very often our actions betray our ideas. Some say it doesn't make any difference what you believe, it all depends upon how you act. That is nonsense, because we act upon our beliefs. If we put truth into our mind, then we will lead truly human lives. Now, if every idea works itself out into act, see how important it is to put true ideas into our mind? We ought to treat our mind just exactly as we treat our stomach. We do not put garbage in our stomach. So we have pure food laws. But our stomach is not nearly as important as our mind. And some people read murders, headlines whenever there's a hatchet murder. Wonderful. Some newspapers delight in a story of that particular kind. Well, think of putting infidelities, disloyalties, slanders, backbitings, and all of that into one's head. It's all going to work itself out into act eventually. That's why it's important to keep the right kind of thoughts in one's head. But it may be objected, well, how about evil? Should we not know evil? The old Greek Socrates said that evil is ignorance. That is not true. Otherwise, the more educated you were, the better, the more educated you were, the more virtuous you would be. Education does not deliver us always from evil. Sometimes education makes clever devils instead of stupid ones. And if we have to have a choice between the two, we much prefer the stupid. And then, from another point of view, when it is said we must know evil, it is well to understand how we might know it. When Satan tempted our first parents in the Garden of Paradise, He said to them, God has forbidden you to eat of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The reason he did that was because God himself knows the difference between good and evil. And if you know the difference between good and evil, you will be like God. Therefore, eat the tree. Know good and evil as he does. And Satan says, and you will be as gods. What was the fallacy? Fallacy was there are two ways of knowing anything. For example, you can know typhoid fever. Well, as I know it now, negatively. I do not have it, so I just simply negate it. There are some people who know typhoid fever experimentally. They have it. Now, how does God know evil? He knows evil negatively. How do we know evil? We know evil like the typhoid fever patient knows typhoid. It gets into us, and it works its way out, not only through the alleys and the gateways of our body, but all through our lives, and it eventually begins to possess us. It's one thing to know intellectual errors, but another thing to know evil deeds experimentally. We may be captured by them. Hence, the goal of all education is to know truth. As our divine Lord said, the truth will make you free. Some people think that freedom alone makes truth. No, freedom alone does not make truth. It helps discover it. It's very essential for it. But the real freedom comes from the truth. Only when you know the truth about an airplane are you free to drive it. Only when you know the truth of medicine are you free to practice it. And when you know the truth of life, then you're most free. Now, not only truth, but a second condition of an educated man is that there be a correlation of studies. That means that when we go to college, particularly, we should realize that despite the fact that they have hundreds and hundreds of courses, I looked at the college catalog not very long ago that had 29 distinct courses on public speaking. There aren't 29 different things to say about it. One thing is, don't read a manuscript or a teletype. But they had 29 courses, and I said, why do you have 29 courses? And they said, well, other universities do. They were keeping up with the Joneses. But in a real college course, there are some courses that are more important than others. And we are to regard wisdom very much as a pyramid. And therefore, the wisdom that is at the top of the pyramid in sciences, well, such as the Greeks put at the top, metaphysics, mathematics, physics, which is a little different from our modern physics, but we'll let that go. They said that all of these sciences illumined the lower sciences, which is true. For example, you would not understand music unless you had mathematics. In a musical composition, not every note has the same stress. In language, not everyone has the same emphasis, every word. But today, the tendency in education, instead of having some courses which are much more important than which everyone ought to take, in order that he might be truly informed to live a human life, we have the shelf theory. The shelf theory is that you have a number of bottles on the shelf. These are bottles. The camera will stand back when I draw, please. Now, the idea is, when you go to college today, is it doesn't make any difference what course you take. You just elect any course that you please. And at the end of 4 years, you collect 64 bottles, 64 credits. It doesn't make a particle of difference what's in the bottles. Sand, water, milk, makes no difference what. They all have equal value. Bring them to the dean, and you'll get a sheepskin. The result is that people today are not getting the education that they ought to receive. They got a congerie of unrelated and disconnected and disjointed subjects, but they cannot put them together. A really educated man sees a relationship between various branches of knowledge. For example, between science and theology, between history and the Old Testament, and so forth. On the other hand, our assumption today in education is that no one subject is more important than another, and what is important is that you count something that has never been counted before. If you do that, you're supposed to really deserve a PhD. And that is the reason we have really peculiar theses. I know a university that has counted the datives, the vocatives, the ablatives, and the genitives in Virgil, the infinitives in Augustine. Did you know that there was a university that gave a PhD thesis degree for the thesis 4 Ways of Cooking Ham? Did you know that there was a university that gave, imagine, a doctorate philosophy degree? It almost makes you want to forget philosophy. They gave a PhD degree for a thesis on 4 ways of dishwashing. Then there was an MA thesis given, or degree given, for a psychological study of the post-rotational eye movement of squabs. But I think the prize is that university, and I do not mention the name of any of these universities. It was the university that gave a PhD degree to the student who wrote on the microbic content of cotton undershirts. Can't you imagine the student all the time working, slaving on that thesis till he got it done? Therefore, not only the knowledge of truth, and not only a correlation of subjects with certain subjects which ought to be essential, so that a man will be truly educated, but finally, a truly educated man will also have a philosophy of life. That is to say, he will be so educated that he will deepen the mystery of things, increase his knowledge of one particular thing. Here's an example of increasing knowledge. Take, for example, the atom. Now, a man who's truly educated would know that the atom in the 19th century was considered as homogeneous, like a billiard ball, all matter. Then we developed our knowledge, deepened it. We found that at the center was a positive charge of electricity, and round about were negative charges called neutrons. Then we discovered that this was a kind of a miniature of the solar system. And in the center was the sun, which corresponded to the proton, and round about, corresponding to neutrons, were Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, the various planets. Oh, yes, now that the dog show is on, Pluto. And then the knowledge was deepened a little more, as Sir James Jeans said. Now we discovered that the most scientific explanation of the universe is that everything is light. Either bottled light, matter, like this board, or unbottled light, like illumination. That's deepening knowledge. Today, the tendency in education, instead of deepening the mystery, is to make substitutions. Here there is a development like life itself, where life begins with a fetus and finally a complete organism. But here there's substitution. For example, the automobile was substituted for the horse and buggy. But the automobile didn't grow out of the horse and buggy. And so today, students, instead of being given a very definite philosophy of life which they can explore all their days after they get their A.B. and their Ph.D., they're merely given a point of view, a fad, a fancy. And then after 10, 20 years, it's no good. Think of those who were educated 40 years ago. They were entirely influenced by the philosophy of Spencer. Now he's forgotten. Freud will be as forgotten in 30 years as Spencer's forgotten now. And a student, therefore, who finishes without a definite philosophy of life, whose mystery he can deepen every day, is rather like a man who has whirled himself around until he became dizzy. The earth under his feet no longer looks stable. Everything is in movement. And is it that makes life unpleasant to live? Whereas if one has a philosophy of life that is solid, that stands up against all vicissitudes, then he can enter the labyrinth of life and take with him the string of that philosophy. He can always find his way back. But today, men are laying down the tracks, for example, of idealism, and then tearing up those tracks, then laying down other tracks, and then tearing those up, with the result that life is lived without ever having explored its depth. Just as men today are not exploring the depth of love in marriage, but substituting one for another. So they're substituting one fad, one fancy for another, instead of getting hold of that which is solid and bedrock that makes life a joy to live. And this kind of education means, of course, that in a democracy, if there's any ideal, it is this, that we do not want uniformity of education. We want